The talk had started before she finished loading the supply wagon. 3 men at the Harwick Exchange on the Monday before departure, speaking in the particular tone of men who believe they are being practical rather than unkind. The substance of what they said was that a widow running a 40-mile cattle drive with 230 head was not a reasonable undertaking, and someone ought to say so. They said so to each other and to the 2 or 3 people within earshot, and the saying traveled, as sayings in a district traveled, and it reached June Crane by Tuesday morning through the note that a neighbor girl brought to the kitchen door before 7. June read the note. She set it on the kitchen table. She went out to check the shoe on the roan gelding that had been favoring his left front since Saturday. The shoe was fine. The favoring was a stone bruise that would resolve in 2 days if she kept the gelding off hard ground, which meant switching him to the east pasture and pulling the gray from the south string to replace him in the drive remuda. She made the switch before breakfast. By the time Dex came in with the morning report, she had the coffee made and the remuda adjustment noted in the drive log, and the note from the exchange was still on the kitchen table where she had left it, and she did not pick it up again. Her name was June Crane, and she was 34, and her husband Wade had died 8 months ago in March, a fast death from a chest sickness that had not seemed serious until it was. She had been running the Crane property alone since then, which was the same property she had been running alongside Wade before then, which meant the work was familiar and the load was heavier, and the specific weight of the heavier load was the kind that was carried rather than complained about. She was not a woman who complained about the load. She was a woman who checked the shoe on the roan gelding before breakfast when a note told her the district had opinions about her plans. The drive needed to happen. The cattle needed to move to the railhead at Morrow Flats before the end of October, and the end of October was 2 weeks away, and the drive was 40 miles and would take 4 days if she ran it correctly, which she intended to run it. She had 230 head in good condition and 5 riders and a supply wagon and a route she had taken 3 times with Wade and knew in the specific way of someone who had read a road in different weathers across multiple seasons. She was going to run it. The district's opinion about whether she was capable of running it was not a variable she was going to factor into her planning. She was back at the table with coffee when Dex came in with the morning report. Dex was her foreman. He had been Wade's foreman first for 6 years before Wade died, and he had become hers in the 8 months since, without either of them discussing the transition in any explicit way. Because the transition had simply been what the situation required, and both of them had understood this. He was 51 and had run cattle in 4 districts and was the kind of man who communicated in specifics rather than in general reassurances, which was the kind of man June had always found useful and found now essential. He told her the remuda was ready. He told her Cull had a question about the drag position for the first day, and would she speak with him before they moved out. He told her the creek crossing at Fallow was going to be higher than usual given the rain the previous week, and they should plan to scout it before the herd came through. She told him she had already planned to scout the ford. She said she would speak with Cull about the drag position after breakfast. She asked whether the supply wagon was fully loaded, and he said, nearly 2 more hours. He said one more thing. He said Bart Voss from the North property had been at the exchange the previous afternoon and had mentioned he was moving his own small string south along the Ridge Road and would be passing through the same general territory as their route for the first 2 days, and had asked whether June would have any objection to him riding the parallel route alongside if their timing worked out that way. Dex said he had told Voss he would ask. June thought about this for a moment. She said tell him he was welcome to ride alongside if his route took him that direction. She said it mattered that he understood the word alongside. Dex said he would convey that. His name was Bart Voss, and he was 46 and had been running the North Harwick spread for 12 years. He had known Wade Crane in the way that neighboring ranchers knew each other across a district. which was well enough to work together when working together was required and to stay out of each other's operations otherwise. He had known June Crane the same way, which was respectfully and at appropriate distance. He had attended Wade's funeral in March with the rest of the district and had expressed his condolences to June afterward in the specific brief way that he expressed things he meant, which was directly and without elaboration. He had been aware since Wade's death of the specific situation she was in, which was a manageable property and an autumn drive and a crew that had been her husband's before it was hers and that had now to be hers fully. He had also been aware of the district's view of the situation, which was the view that had been audible at the exchange Monday morning, which was that a widow running a 40-mile drive was not a reasonable undertaking. He had not offered to help. He was a man with a specific understanding of what offering unsolicited help communicated, which was that the person receiving the offer was not believed to be capable of managing without it, and he had no interest in communicating that about June Crane. He had watched across 8 months as she managed the Crane property correctly and had kept his distance and his respect and had offered nothing. What he had done was notice that his own autumn movement needed to happen and that his most practical route south ran roughly parallel to her drive route for the first 2 days, and that the timing aligned, and that asking to ride alongside was not the same thing as offering to help. The asking was the important distinction. He was asking permission to be present on her left side for a portion of her drive, not offering to manage any portion of it. She could say no. The no would have been completely right. She had said he was welcome to ride alongside if his route took him that direction, and the alongside was understood. The phrasing was hers, and it was precise, and he respected the precision. He understood the alongside. He had understood it before she said it, and the saying of it confirmed what he already knew, which was that she was a woman who said what she meant and expected to be taken at what she meant, and the beside meant beside, and nothing else. He went back to his own preparations. He told his foreman he would be moving the string south starting Wednesday and would be riding with a neighbor's drive for the first portion of the route. He did not say anything further about it. They moved out on a Wednesday morning in October with 230 head, 5 riders, 1 supply wagon, and a second rider from the North Harwick spread who kept his horse 1 length to June Crane's right and slightly behind, which was the position of a man who was going the same direction and was not leading anything. The first day was the first day of any drive, which was the day on which the herd was still sorting itself out, and the crew was still sorting itself out, and the rhythm of the thing was not yet established. June rode point and called the pace and the direction and the corrections when the lead cattle drifted, and she called them with the specific clarity of a woman who had been on enough drives to know that corrections called clearly were corrections that held. And the corrections held. Cull had his answer about the drag position before they moved out, delivered by June at the supply wagon while Dex stood nearby and did not participate in the conversation. The answer was that the drag position was where she had placed it, and the reason was operational, and she had given him the reason. Cull had listened and had not argued, and had taken the drag position she had given him, and the drive had moved out. Bart rode alongside. He offered nothing. He observed everything with the attention of a man who was interested in what he was watching, and what he was watching was a drive being run correctly. Fallow Creek on the evening of the first day was running higher than Dex had predicted and higher than June had planned for. The water was fast and brown with the week's rain, and the usual crossing point was not the crossing point tonight. The footing there was uncertain, and the current pushed hard at the center, and June could see from the bank that the usual line would cost her cattle and possibly a wagon wheel. She dismounted and handed her reins to Sim and walked the bank for 20 minutes in the failing light, upstream and downstream, reading the bottom through the water where she could see it and reading the surface where she could not. The surface told you things about what was underneath if you had crossed enough water in enough conditions to know how to read it. And she had. She found a line 40 yards upstream where the creek was wider and the water ran shallower and the bottom showed gravel through the current rather than the soft silt that had swallowed the usual crossing. She came back to the herd and called the upstream line. Cull looked at Bart. It was the specific look of a man checking to see whether the instruction he had just received was going to be confirmed or revised by a different authority. Bart looked at the line June had indicated, and then looked at the creek surface, and then looked at his own hands, which were resting on his saddle horn and were not pointing at anything. June called the upstream line again. Cull rode to his position. The herd crossed at the line she had chosen. The bottom held across the full width. 230 head crossed Fallow Creek before full dark without incident, the supply wagon last, and June rode alongside the wagon through the crossing and felt the bottom under her horse's hooves confirm the reading she had made from the bank, and the reading had been correct. Bart crossed behind the wagon. He said nothing about the ford. The second day brought Quarry Ridge, a 4-mile traverse across the east face of a limestone ridge that required the herd to move in a longer and tighter column than the first day, and required the drag riders to work against the tendency of cattle to slow on rising ground. June set the pace at the ridge approach and called the column configuration and rode the length of it twice in the first hour to confirm it was holding. At midday, Cull brought his horse alongside hers and told her the drag was working too hard to hold the pace she had set, and that if she dropped the pace by a quarter, the tail of the column could breathe and the whole drive would move more steadily and they would cover the same ground in the same time. June heard him out. She told him she had set the pace for the led cattle based on what the ridge face needed, and that dropping the pace for the drag would string the column and she would lose the configuration she needed for the descent, and that the drag working harder on the ascent was the correct trade for a clean descent, and the descent was where the day's time was won or lost. Cull said he had crossed this ridge 6 times. June said she had crossed it 4. She said the configuration held. She rode forward to the point. Cull looked at Bart. Bart had his eyes on the ridgeline above the herd, reading the terrain ahead with the attention of a man who was interested in what he saw and was not available for what was happening behind him. The configuration held across the full traverse. The descent went as June had planned it, the column tight and controlled on the steep east face, and the herd arrived at the third night camp in correct order with the last light of the day still in the sky, 1 hour ahead of the schedule she had set. The calf was born at 2 a.m. on the third night. Sim came to her bedroll, the youngest of the crew, 17 and careful about not waking people unnecessarily, which meant the calf was real and needed her. She pulled on her boots and followed him to where the cow had settled at the edge of the herd away from the main body, and she crouched in the dark and confirmed the birth and confirmed the cow's condition and confirmed that the calf was on its feet and nursing. Both were sound. She stood in the dark and thought about what this meant for the 4th day. It meant a slower day. A calf that knew could not hold the pace she had planned, and the pace she had planned was already the minimum pace that got them to Morrow Flats within the buyer's window. She had 2 options. The first was to leave the cow and calf at camp on the 4th morning and push the drive the remaining distance at the planned pace and arrive on time with 230 head. The second was to adjust the 4th day's pace to accommodate the calf and arrive later than planned with 231 head. She was not going to take the first option. The calf was sound and the cow was good, and they had been part of the 230 head when the drive started, and they were going to be part of what arrived at Morrow Flats. She would deal with the buyer's window. She told Sim to let the crew sleep and went back to her own bedroll and lay awake for an hour, working out the revised fourth-day pace and the adjusted arrival window and what she needed to tell the buyer at Morrow Flats to hold the transaction for the additional time. She decided to send Dex ahead at first light to explain the situation directly. Buyers who dealt in live cattle understood that live cattle occasionally produced additional live cattle, and the explanation was honest, and the additional head was not nothing. She slept for 3 hours. Before first light, she woke and briefed Dex and sent him south at a fast pace with the message for the buyer's agent. At first light, she told the crew the fourth day would run at 3/4 pace and explained why in the same direct way she had explained every other decision across the drive. Cull did not look at Bart. He looked at the calf. The fourth day was the slowest day, and it was also a good day, in the way that a day was good when every decision in it had been made correctly and the drive arrived where it was going. They came into Morrow Flats in the late afternoon, with the light still in the sky, 231 head, the calf moving steadily between its mother and Sim, who had appointed himself the calf's personal escort for the final 5 miles. The buyer's agent was at the gate. Dex was already there. The count took an hour. The transaction was concluded before dark. June Crane signed the papers at the pen gate, with the crew making camp 30 yards behind her and the cattle in the pens, and 4 days of road behind all of them. The cattle were someone else's problem now. All 231 of them, including the one that had not been part of the original count. She walked out of the pen, and Bart Voss was leaning against the fence. He said her name, June, the way a name sounded when it was the name of the woman who had read the Ford at Fallow Creek in the failing light and found the crossing line. That held, and who had held the Quarry Ridge configuration against a crew challenge, and whose calculation about the calf had produced 231 head at Morrow Flats when she had started with 230. She said he had ridden beside her the whole way. He said he had. She asked why. He told her he had ridden beside her because that was where a man belonged when a drive was being run correctly and he was not the one running it. He told her he had ridden beside her the whole way because the whole way was what the whole way meant, and because dropping back or stepping forward at any point would have meant something that riding beside her did not mean. And he was not interested in meaning the wrong thing. She was quiet for a moment. She said she had seen Cull look at him. He said he had noticed. She said thank you for what you did not do. He said you are welcome for what I did not do. She said Marin, her own name, offered the way she offered things she meant. He said June. The second time, said in the tone of a man who had been going the same direction as a woman for 4 days and intended to continue going the same direction. This is Dusty Vows, where they said a widow could not run a drive, and she ran it, and he rode beside her the whole way, and that was the whole of it. If you want the next story the moment it lands, subscribe now. Then back to Morrow Flats. I'm not going anywhere. She said it the way she said the things she had decided, which was plainly and without the performance of deciding. She held his gaze outside the Morrow Flats stock pens with the papers signed and the count done and 231 head in the pens. You rode beside me the whole way, and you did not step forward when Cull looked at you, and you did not say anything about the ford or the ridge or the calf, and I am not going anywhere. As if it were the simplest arithmetic in the world. Bart Voss, her name for him, said the way a name sounded when it was the name of the man who had positioned his horse 1 length to her right and slightly behind for 4 days across 40 miles and had not moved from that position when a crew member looked to him for the authority she was carrying. He nodded once, The stock pens were behind them, and Morrow Flats was around them, and the Crane property was 40 miles north, and the North Harwich spread was 40 miles and one ridge over, and neither of them was going anywhere. Tell me, when Cull looked at Bart at the Fallow Creek crossing, and Bart looked at his own hands instead of at June or at the water, what did that tell you about the kind of man Bart Voss was before June Crane knew it herself? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one. Now, back to Morrow Flats. She had run a 40-mile drive with 230 head and had delivered 231, and the delivering of more than she had started with was the specific kind of operational result that told you something about the quality of the management, which was that it had been attentive enough to account for the unexpected and had not let the unexpected become a reason to leave something behind. The calf was the clearest example of this, but was not the only example. The Fallow Creek ford was an example of operational judgment applied to a changed situation. The Quarry Ridge hold was an example of authority maintained under pressure. The calf was an example of the same thing applied to a different kind of pressure, which was the pressure of the fourth day and the buyer's timing and the option of leaving the cow and calf and running the drive without them, which she had assessed and declined. 3 examples across 4 days, each different, each requiring a specific response, and the specific responses had all been correct, and the correctness was in the 231 head at Morrow Flats before dark on the 4th day. Bart Voss had ridden beside her for 4 days and had seen all 3 and had not participated in any of them. He had been present and had been a resource and had not been used as a resource and had not required to be used as a resource. He had ridden beside her because the beside was the correct position for a man who was going the same direction and was not running the drive, and he had held the position for the whole way because the whole way was what the whole way meant. She had seen Cull look at him twice. She had seen him look at his hands the first time and at the ridge the second time, and the looking away was the whole of what he had done at both moments, and the whole of what he had done was exactly right. He had removed himself from the frame at the moment she needed the frame to contain only her, and the removing had been done without performance and without the kind of pointed self-effacement that was its own form of calling attention. He had simply not been available for Cull's look, and the not being available had required Cull to find another place to look, and the only other place was at June Crane, which was the place the look was supposed to go. She had handled Cull correctly at Quarry Ridge. She had heard his objection and had assessed it and had given him her reasoning and had held the position. She had not raised her voice. She had not made it into a confrontation larger than it was. She had given Cull the respect of a direct explanation and had expected and received the respect of compliance, and the compliance had produced the correct result, and the result was in the count at Morrow Flats. The drive had been run correctly from Wednesday morning departure to Friday late afternoon arrival, and the running had been June Crane's running from the first correction at the lead to the last signature on the papers, and the beside had been beside the whole way. She had told him thank you for what you did not do, and he had told her she was welcome for what he did not do, and both of those things were true and were also not the whole of the thing, and the rest of the thing was here. Outside the Morrow Flats stock pens with neither of them going anywhere. The North Harwich spread was 40 miles and one ridge over, and the Crane property was 40 miles north, and neither of them was going anywhere immediately. And the going somewhere eventually was going to be going somewhere together. And the together was the whole of what the beside had been pointing toward across 4 days. And the pointing toward was here and was settled, and both of them were staying, and the matter was settled, and it held. They had said a widow could not run a drive, and she had run it, and the running had been correct from the first morning to the last pen, and he had ridden beside her the whole way, and the whole way was what the whole way meant, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. She had run the drive correctly, from the first correction at the led cattle on the first morning to the last signature at the pen gate on the fourth afternoon, and the running had been entirely hers, and the 231 head in the pens at Morrow Flats was the measure of the running, and the measure was accurate. She had read the ford at Fallow Creek by walking the bank for 20 minutes, and had found the line, and had called it, and it had held. She had held the Quarry Ridge configuration against Cull's challenge, and the descent had been clean. She had made the call on the calf at 2 a.m, and had sent decks ahead, and had arrived with one more head than she had started with. 3 decisions across 4 days, each different, each requiring the specific response that the specific situation required, and the specific responses had all been correct. Bart Voss had been 1 length to her right and slightly behind for the portions of the drive where the routes overlapped, and he had not been part of any of the 3 decisions. He had been present while she made them and had removed himself from the frame at the moments when removing himself was what was needed, and the removing had been complete and had not been performed. He had simply been unavailable for Cull's looks, which had required Cull to find the only other available face, which was June Crane's. She had come out of the pen gate, and he had been leaning against the fence, and he had said her name, and she had said he had ridden beside her the whole way, and he had said yes, and she had asked why, and he had told her. He had ridden beside her, because that was where a man belonged when a drive was being run correctly, and he was not the one running it. He had ridden beside her the whole way, because the whole way was what the whole way meant. He had not dropped back at the ford or stepped forward at the ridge or ridden ahead when Cull challenged her, because dropping back or stepping forward or riding ahead would have meant something that riding beside her did not mean. She had thanked him for what he had not done. He had said she was welcome for what he had not done. Both of those were the plainest versions of what they meant, and the plainness was the whole of the conversation at the pen gate, and the conversation was here, and neither of them was going anywhere. The Crane property was 40 miles north, and the North Harwick spread was 40 miles and 1 ridge over, and Morrow Flats was around them, and neither of them was going anywhere immediately. And the not going anywhere immediately was the beginning of the going somewhere together that the beside had been pointing toward across 4 days and 40 miles. She had said, "I'm not going anywhere," and she had meant it in the specific way she meant the things she said, which was entirely. He had nodded once and had meant the nod in the same way. Both of them were staying, and the matter was settled, and it held. The drive had been run correctly, and the beside had been beside the whole way, and neither of them was going anywhere. And the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. The district had said a widow could not run a drive, and the drive had been run correctly from departure to delivery, and the correctly was in the count at the pen gate, and in the clean descent from Quarry Ridge, and in the line at Fallow Creek that it held. And none of those things were the district's to assess, because the drive was over, and the papers were signed, and the cattle were in the pens. June Crane had done the thing they said she could not do. She had done it with the specific competence of a woman who knew what she was doing, and had known it going in, and had known it at 2 a.m. when the calf was born, and the 4th day calculation had to be remade in the dark, and the remaking had been correct. The note from the exchange was still on the kitchen table at the Crane property, where she had left it on Tuesday morning before going out to check the roan's shoe. She had not picked it up again. She was not going to pick it up when she got home. She was going to open the door and set her coat and her drive log on the chair by the door and make coffee and sit down at the kitchen table and be in the specific quiet of a completed thing. And the note was going to stay where it was. Bart Voss was 46 and had been running the North Harwick spread for 12 years and had ridden beside June Crane for 4 days across 40 miles and was not going anywhere. He had said he rode beside her because that was where a man belonged when a drive was being run correctly and he was not the one running it, and the belonging was still here, and the ride was over, and neither of them was going anywhere. She had thanked him for what he had not done, and he had said she was welcome for what he had not done, and both of those things were the whole of what needed to be said at that moment, and the moment had been correct. And both of them were staying. And the matter was settled. And it held. The beside was over. The going alongside was beginning. It was a different kind of beside, the kind that was not a position behind or in front of anything, but was the position of two people going the same direction together, and the together was here, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. Cull had looked at Bart twice across 4 days. The first time had been at Follow Creek, after June called the crossing at the upstream line, and Bart had looked at the line and then at the water and then at his hands. The second time had been on Quarry Ridge, after she held the configuration against Cull's objection, and Bart had been looking at the ridge above, reading the terrain ahead, with the attention of a man who was interested in what he saw. Both times Cull's look had found nowhere to land except on June Crane, which was where it was supposed to land. And both times June Crane had been there for it to land on, which was the position she held for the full 4 days, and the full 4 days was what the full 4 days meant. She had been there to be looked at by a crew that was learning to look at her, and she had been there to call the ford and hold the ridge and make the call on the calf, and she had been there at the pen gate to sign the papers, and all of those had been the places she was supposed to be, and she had been in all of them correctly. Bart Voss had been 1 length to her right and slightly behind across all of it, and the 1 length to the right and slightly behind had been the whole of his contribution and the whole of what she had needed from him, which was presence without interference, which was the specific thing that a man with the capacity to interfere and the discipline not to could provide, and he had provided it. She had told him it was the whole way that mattered. He had said yes. The whole way was what the whole way meant. The repetition of the whole way between them had been the repetition of a thing they both understood, which was that there was no version of the beside that included stepping forward at the hard parts, because the stepping forward at the hard parts would have undone the beside and she would have run a different drive, which was not the drive she ran her drive. He rode beside it. And neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying. And it held. She had been running the Crane property for 8 months since Wade died, and had been running it correctly, and had known she could run the drive, and had run the drive, and the running of the drive was now complete, and was in the count at the pen gate. And neither of those things depended on what anyone at the Harwick Exchange had said on the Monday before departure. The note was still on the kitchen table. She had set it down before breakfast and had not picked it up again and was not going to pick it up. Because the note was from before the drive, and the drive was done, and the before the drive was a different thing from the thing that was here, which was the pen gate, and Bart Voss leaning against the fence, and neither of them going anywhere. She was 34, and had been managing well for 8 months, and had run a 40-mile drive with 230 head, and had arrived with 231, and none of that was going anywhere, and neither was Bart Voss, who had been 1 length to her right and slightly behind across 40 miles, and had not stepped forward when a crew member looked to him for the authority she was carrying. He had looked at his hands. He had looked at the ridge above. He had been unavailable at both moments in the specific way of a man who had understood what the moments required of him, and the understanding had been complete and had not needed to be explained. She had said thank you for what you did not do, and it had been the right thing to say. He had said you are welcome for what I did not do, and it had been the right thing to say. Both of those were the plainest possible versions of what they meant, and plain was what the pen gate at Morrow Flats at the end of 4 days and 40 miles called for, and both of them were staying. And the matter was settled, and it held. The drive had required 4 specific kinds of judgment across 4 days, and she had applied all 4 correctly. The first was the ford at Fallow Creek, which required reading the water and finding the line, and she had read it and found it, and it had held. The second was the Quarry Ridge configuration, which required holding a position under crew pressure, and she had held it, and the descent had been correct. The third was the calf decision at 2 a.m, which required choosing the option that was harder and slower and more correct, and she had chosen it, and had managed the buyer's timing through decks, and had arrived with one more head than she had started with. The fourth was the overall management of a crew that had been her husband's before it was hers, and across 4 days and 40 miles the crew had become hers, including Cull, who had looked at Bart twice and had found nowhere to look but at June Crane. That was the 4 kinds of judgment across 4 days, and all 4 had gone correctly. And the correctly was in the count, and in the signed papers, and in the 231 head in the pens at Morrow Flats. Bart Voss had watched all 4, and had not participated in any of them, and the not participating had been the whole of his correct behavior, and the correct behavior was what he was going to continue, which was riding beside and not in front. She was going to run the Crane property and run it correctly, and the alongside was going to be beside, which was the right word and the right position, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. The whole way was what the whole way meant. He had said so, and he had demonstrated it across 4 days and 40 miles. And the demonstration was complete, and was in the record of the drive, and the record was the count at the pen gate, and the signed papers, and the crew that had run the drive under June Crane's authority from the first morning correction to the last afternoon delivery. She had not asked him to ride beside her. She had asked him to understand the word alongside, and had confirmed, when he understood it, that he was welcome to come. The welcome had been conditional on the understanding, and the understanding had been correct, and the condition had been met for the full 40 miles, and the meeting of the condition for the full 40 miles was the whole of what he had done. It was the right whole. The whole was what mattered. Not the easy portions, not the portions where the authority was not being tested and the beside was comfortable and cost nothing. The whole, including Fallow Creek and including Quarry Ridge and including 2 a.m. with the calf. He had been 1 length to her right and slightly behind across all of it. Neither of them was going anywhere. Morrow Flats was around them, and the stock pens were behind them, and the drive was complete, and the papers were signed, and the drive was done, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. The Crane property was 40 miles north, and the North Harwick spread was 40 miles and 1 ridge over, and both properties had cattle, and both properties had work, and both properties were going to continue being what they were. And going forward, the going forward was going to be done alongside. And the alongside was the right word, and was different from beside, in the specific way that beside was a drive position and alongside was a life position. And the life position was here and was going to be here, and neither of them was going anywhere. She was 34 and had run a cattle drive correctly and had delivered 231 head and had signed the papers, and had said, "I'm not going anywhere," to the man who had ridden 1 length to her right and slightly behind for 4 days. And all of that was settled and complete, and both of them were staying. He was 46 and had ridden beside a drive for 4 days and had looked at his hands when a crew member looked at him for authority, and had looked at the ridge above when the crew member looked again, and had said he rode beside her, because that was where a man belonged when a drive was being run correctly, and he was not the one running it. And all of that was settled and complete, and both of them were staying. And neither of them was going anywhere. And the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. Dex had run the drive as her foreman for 4 days, and had done it in the specific way of a man who had decided whose foreman he was, and had been that person's foreman completely. He had scouted the ford. He had reported Cull's drag question. He had gone ahead to Morrow Flats on the fourth morning to hold the buyer's window, and he had been at the gate when they arrived, which was the place a foreman was supposed to be. He was 51 and had run cattle in 4 districts and had known how to be a foreman and had been one for 8 months to June Crane the way he had been one for 6 years to Wade Crane, which was entirely and without equivocation. Sim had escorted the calf for the final 5 miles of the 4th day. He was 17 and this had been his first drive, and he had done everything he was told and had done one thing he had not been told, which was to stay beside the calf on the 4th morning when the calf was finding its pace and to keep it moving and to not let it drift from its mother. He had done this without being asked. The calf had arrived at Morrow Flats in good condition. The crew had run the drive. The crew was hers. The crew had been her husband's before it was hers, and it was hers now, and the drive had made it hers in the way that drives made things, which was by the shared work of the road and the decisions that had to be made and the decisions that had been made correctly, and the correctly was in the count. 231 head at Morrow Flats. She had started with 230. Neither of them was going anywhere. The matter was settled. Both of them were staying. And it held. The 3 men at the Harwick Exchange on the Monday before departure had said a widow could not run a drive. The saying had reached June Crane by Tuesday morning, and she had set it on the kitchen table and had gone out to check the roan's shoe. The shoe was fine. The drive was run. The count was 231 head. The papers were signed. The note was on the kitchen table where she had left it. She was going home to a property that had been managed correctly for 8 months and that was going to continue to be managed correctly, and there was going to be someone alongside, and the alongside was the right word and was not behind and was not in front and was going to be alongside in all the ways that alongside meant across all the days that were ahead. Bart Voss was not going anywhere. She was not going anywhere. The matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and the drive was done, and the beside had been the whole way, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held completely. She had run her drive. He had ridden beside it. The beside had been the whole way, and the whole way was what the whole way meant. And both of them were staying, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and the drive was done, and it held. The drive was done. The beside had been the whole way. She had started with 230 head and arrived with 231, and that was the whole of the drive, and it was enough, and it was done, and both of them were staying, and it held. The going home was going to be the going home of a woman who had completed the thing she said she would complete, and the completing was going to be in her when she opened the door and made the coffee and sat at the table, and the note from the exchange was going to stay on the table where she had left it, because the note was from before the drive. And the drive was done. And the done was here, and neither of them was going anywhere. She was not going anywhere. He was not going anywhere. They had been at Morrow Flats and were still at Morrow Flats, and the stock pens were behind them, and the drive was complete, and the beside had been the whole way, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held. She had read the ford and found the line and called the crossing, and the line had held. She had held the ridge configuration, and the descent had been correct. She had made the call on the calf and arrived with one more head than she started with. She had managed a crew that was learning to be hers, and the crew was hers now. She had done all 4 correctly, and all 4 were in the count and in the papers. And the count was 231, and the papers were signed, and neither of them was going anywhere. And the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and the drive was done. And it held. The beside had been the whole way, and the whole way was what the whole way meant, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and both of them were staying, and it held completely and finally. And it held again. Both of them were staying. And the drive had been run, and the beside had been the whole way, and the matter was settled, and it held. She had run her drive, and it had been run correctly, and neither of them was going anywhere, and the matter was settled, and the drive was done, and both of them were staying. And it held.